The first thing that we need to ask ourselves when we approach layers is, what are layers and why and how do we use them? Well, when we first look at an image, you can see here that we have our layers panel open. What we're seeing over here is a layer, a single layer called background. Well, background is a very special kind of layer. It's a layer that is locked and that has no transparency to it. And we really can't do much with that layer. Anytime we paint on the layer, we're actually painting on that layer. We're modifying its pixels and we are destroying our original image. What layers allow us to do is, first of all, to have transparency. And that allows us to go in and to make changes without destroying our original image. Let me show you what this image looks like now when it consists of all of its layers. It actually was put together with many layers. And again, if we go over here to our layers panel, we can see that we have a lot of different layers. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go through these layers one by one and show you the various types of layers that we have and how they're being used. Then, when we actually get into the tutorial segments of this disk, what you're going to be able to do is learn more about each one of these types of layers. Okay, the first thing that I want to do is I want to hide all the layers except for one. And I'm going to call that my base layer, the bottom layer, which is the color splash. The way that I do that, you can see here you've got a little eyeball that you can click. And the eyeball turns off and on various layers, one at a time. If I hold down my Option key on a Mac or Alt key on Windows and click on an eyeball, what happens is that eyeball stays on and everything else is turned off. If I do it again, I'm holding down my Alt or Option key, all the layers are turned back on. So let's turn them off and let's see what we have here. We have our color splash. That's just the base of the image, the farthest layer down in the stack. Now, layers that are higher in the stack are going to appear on top of this image. The thing that I have immediately above here is I have an adjustment layer. And if I turn that on, you can see that that adjustment layer, in this case it's a levels adjustment layer, actually modifies how the layer below looks. Now, there's a little arrow that I have here. This is called a link. And this is linked. These two layers are linked together. Now, this is a very special kind of link because this is called a clipping length. And what the clipping does is it makes sure that the changes are only made to the layer immediately below this adjustment layer. Now, I know a lot of these may not make a lot of sense to you right now, but they will very, very shortly. The other thing that I've done here, if I highlight my levels adjustment layer, is I've changed the blending mode from normal to multiply. And you can see that it actually has another effect on the layer. We'll get into that a lot later also. On top of that, we have a layer that I call flowers. Now, this is another special type of layer. This layer is called a smart object layer. Now, let's go in here. You can tell a smart object because it's got a little icon in the lower right hand corner of the layer icon. You can see that this layer does not have that little icon on it. And that is a very special type of object. What it enables you to do is add things called smart filters. Now, the difference between a smart filter and a regular filter is that once you apply, for instance, I applied Gaussian blur here. Once you apply Gaussian blur normally, that's it. It's done. You can't change it. But what I can do here as a smart filter, I can turn the Gaussian blur off and on. But not only can I turn it off and on, if I come in here and I double click Gaussian blur, then I can actually go in and change the amount of blur that I had in here. Now I'm just going to cancel that and get back to where I was. Now again, on top of this layer, I have another curves adjustment layer. And you can see here that the curves adjustment layer, I have it clipped so that it only affects the flowers layer. Now if I unclip it by holding down my Option or Alt key and clicking on the border between the two layers, you can see that my cursor changes from a finger to this little link icon. And if I click it, then you can see two things that have happened. One is that the little clipping arrow vanished and the layer icon moved over. The other thing that you see is now, as I turn this off and on, this curves adjustment layer actually affects everything below, all the way down. So if I want to limit its effect, I turn that back on by holding down my Alt or Option key. Okay, next we have a text layer. And this text layer is just the word wine. Well, I can go in, I can modify my text, and we'll get into that in a little while also. But I can also add various layer effects on here. If I take all my effects off, well, I really don't see anything here. And the reason I don't see anything here is that I have gone in and I have, let's come up here, I have eliminated my fill opacity. So if I want to increase the fill opacity, you can see I can see the word wine here, and I can turn off my layer effects. My bevel and emboss is gone, and the glow has gone. So we'll talk about how to put these effects on and how also to make text transparent by using this fill effect. Now, finally, we have another layer on top, which is our bottle and glass layer, and this is the main part of our picture. Now, I'm going to go in and I'm going to hold down my Option or Alt key, and I'm going to turn off all the other layers here. And you can see here that the checkerboard pattern, which shows transparency, shows that not only do I have a transparent background, but I've also got some transparency within the glass of wine itself and within the bottle, so that if I turn all this back on, you can actually see through the glass of wine. So these are all the things that we can do with layers that we couldn't do without them. And now we're going to get in and we're going to start talking about these layers, and we're going to learn how to use them.